Russian foreign minister has claimed that Adolf Hitler had Jewish blood. The comments have unsurprisingly sparked fury in Israel, with the Israeli foreign minister calling the comments outrageous and unforgivable. Adding further fuel to the fire, Russia has also falsely claimed this week that Israeli mercenaries were fighting alongside the far-right Azov regiment in Ukraine. Joining me from Tel Aviv is Jotam Confino, who joins us from Jerusalem, I believe, or Tel Aviv. I'm not entirely sure.
Tel Aviv, sorry, yes.
There you go. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just give us a sense of the outrage and the reaction to Foreign Minister Lavrov's comments, particularly those suggesting that Adolf Hitler had Jewish blood.
Well, it's not every day that you hear the Israeli foreign minister and the Israeli president asking a superpower to publicly apologize. It is unheard of, really. But in this particular incident, Lavrov crossed a line that Israel simply won't accept, and that is Holocaust conspiracies, particularly about Adolf Hitler having Jewish blood, but also saying that Jews are the biggest anti-Semites. It caused outrage across Israel from left to right, and Yair Lapid, the foreign minister, his granddad was killed in a concentration camp in Mauthausen, so he was particularly angry with Lavrov, and he was really lashing out at him, calling it the lowest form of racism. And since then, the rhetoric has really just escalated. Russia has now also said, as you mentioned, accused Israel of sending mercenaries to fight alongside the Azov unit in Ukraine, and they refused to apologize. However, and within the last hour, we heard in the Israeli media that the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, sent a letter to the Israeli president congratulating him and Israel on Independence Day, which is today, and wishing Israel all the best. But he mentioned nothing about the big diplomatic incident. He didn't apologize, obviously. So it's fair to say that the relationship and the crisis is really brought to a new low, I would say.
Though, of course, Israel has refused to join in with the Western sanctions and all of this and have tried to stay neutral. Many would accuse Israel of not necessarily acting in a good way in helping to support Ukraine.
Exactly. In the beginning, Israel tried its best to really stay neutral, and it did so for two reasons. First of all, Ukraine's President Zelensky asked Israel directly to mediate between Ukraine and Russia. So Israel thought they had to stay neutral. They couldn't lash out at Russia or condemn Russia, really, in the first couple of weeks, which is also why Putin invited Prime Minister Naftali Bennett to Moscow. He was the first Western leader, really, to be in Moscow after the war had started. That's the first reason. And the second reason why Israel didn't want to infuriate Russia was because of its own national security interests. As we all know, Israel is coordinating its airstrikes in Syria against Iranian militias closely with Russia. Russia is really dominating the southern western part of Syrian skies, and Israel has needed its blessing for years now to conduct those airstrikes on a weekly basis. So for those two reasons, they really tried to stay neutral. Eventually, when the overwhelming evidence of war crimes started being brought up in the media, Israel couldn't really be neutral anymore. So the foreign minister condemned Russia for committing war crimes. And this is really what infuriated Russia and what brought them to throw Israel under the bus now by, first of all, Lavrov's Hitler comments, but also talking closely with Hamas now in Gaza. So really just telling Israel, we're done with you.
And just very finally and quickly, though, do you get the sense then that as time goes by and as the war crimes become more and more evident, that Israel is going to condemn this war and potentially go further and assist Ukraine?
Yes, my colleagues at Haaretz actually reported this week that Israeli officials are considering sending military equipment to Ukraine. So it doesn't look like Israel will remain neutral at all, which they aren't anymore. They are definitely condemning Russia.